Today, we're looking at Private Reserve's Grey Flannel. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. I get inks, test them, and share the results with you. Now, Private Reserve's Grey Flannel is a gray ink. Sure, and to make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples. I put the ink into a different pen for a day. I then put it into a Retro 51 Tornado with a broad nib to take my notes for this video. Now, before we get to the writing samples, let's look at the sciencey bits. Up first is the chromatography, and I agree with Vita that I've learned a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down and immediately put it in the water for 10 to 15 seconds. And we see that this ink rushes away from where the water was. Now we see these very light kind of purpley undertones. We see the gray and this almost fluorescent blue across the top. The one on the right I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it into water. And if it wasn't marked at the top with the letter D, I don't know that you would be able to tell the difference between whether this was let dry or not. And this makes me feel like there's going to be no hold on for this ink. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it might be to clean from your pens. I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, we see that this ink does not like to be reactivated at all. That word high is absolutely unreadable. Do not use this ink if you highlight in note-taking situations. Water, with only 30 seconds, that little drop completely obliterated the ink on the page. Ignore the yellow, that's a transfer from a paper towel on a previous ink, and unfortunately it made its way here. Water, though, obliterates it. There's no need for anything more. When we look at the pen flush, we see that it also obliterates it. But again, don't step up from water if you don't have to. Bleach, as would be expected, completely obliterates it, removing it from the page. For the inks I've tested, I've found an average viscosity of 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Private Reserve's Grey Flannel has a viscosity of 1.29. Holy moly, this is a wet flowing ink. That's incredibly wet. That's really close to the water line. To find my average dry times, I use my writing samples done on Clairefontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper with the extra fine and medium nibs. For the inks I've tested, I've found an average dry time of 17 seconds, with the realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. Private Reserve's Grey Flannel has an average dry time of 10 seconds, making it a faster drying ink. It even dries a little bit faster than some of their so-called fast dry inks. Now, let's look at the writing samples. I picked this ink up in sample form. And to keep my writing samples consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium, and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. Let's take a look at Clairefontaine. The only bleed spot is in the scrubby where I'm putting it down stupid thick, and it looks like I scratched the page there. Other than that, we have no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, tons of beautiful shading with the 1.1, although it looks a little thin as a 1.1. I'm wondering, I don't think that is a 1.1. I think that's a medium right there. So I'm going to ignore that whole 1.1 spiel. The extra fine, no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. Beautiful shading throughout all of it. This is really nice shading. I think this might be one of Private Reserve's best shading inks to me so far. 5 seconds to dry. The medium, same tones. No feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shade. Tons of shading all over, and it's beautiful. This is really nice shading. It's probably got to do with that like blue undertone this ink has that helps really bring more of the shading here. It's not a gradual shading. It's a very stark light to dark to light again. Beautiful. 8 seconds to dry. The scrubby of the extra fine and the medium shows plenty of color variation. We got plenty. And the smear test says you could recover this if you smeared it. So, Tomoe River. Ignoring the scrubby where I put it on stupid thick, we have no bleeding, and we have ghosting. The 1.1, and that is a 1.1. Has no feather, no spread. It has halo all over it. except that very light part with the N to E. There's no haloing there. The rest of it has it. No sheen. It does offer quite a bit of shading on Tomoe River with a 1.1. The extra fine, the same tone of gray, no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. Beautiful shading throughout. I don't always get a lot of nice shading on Tomoe River because of the way it lets it dry, but here I get plenty of beautiful shade and only 13 seconds to dry. Now the medium, same tone, no feather, spread, halo, sheen. We have beautiful shading all over. 17 seconds to dry. The scrubby of both shows plenty of color variation, and we got plenty of color variation. The smear test, I think you could actually recover this if you smeared while you were writing. A rare quality for Tomoe River. So Rhodia, no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, and beautiful shading all over this writing. It is really very nice. This is another gray ink to me that stands out really well, which was the reason that sample was so empty. A lot of times after I get through, I put it aside and I come back much later and I wound up using it completely up and having to really just save enough to write my notes for when I film this. Very nice. Extra fine, no feather, spread, halo, sheen, tons of beautiful shading all over this writing. 6 seconds to dry. The medium, same performance, same tone, no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, tons of beautiful shading all over, and 10 seconds to dry. Very manageable dry times. I think these even dried faster than some of their fast dry inks, but I don't know why they called them fast dry. The scrubby for both show us tons of color variation, and we got tons of color variation, and the smear test says you could likely recover it. So what happens if I put it on yellow paper? What does the yellow background do to it? Well, it has no bleeding. I am ignoring the scrubby where I put it on stupid thick. It has no ghosting. So what about that tone difference? And I was really interested in this for a tone difference because this has that blue undertone. So when we give it the green, what happens? Well, nothing. Nothing happens. Not here. Not to the tone of the color. The tones remain the same, although it did affect it when we got to the medium. So we see the 1.1 is the same, the extra fine is the same. That medium definitely is darker. The 1.1 had no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. Lots of beautiful shading all over the place. Extra fine had no feather, spread, halo, sheen, but tons of beautiful shading all over this writing. Brown really shows it off. Jumps really shows it off. Where over is much lighter, the is much darker. It gives us a variety of shading ways, which is really cool to see. 6 seconds to dry. The medium, much darker tone. No feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. Not as much shading. This is not spread down here. That's where I was just being really messy. I think I had a fiber from something stuck in that pen. Something got stuck there. Probably picked up a fiber in an aggressive scrubby. There is a little bit of shading that shows. It's not as nice as we see on other papers or on the extra fine, but it is there. It shows up in over. It shows up in quick. It shows up in jumps. It's there. It's just not as nice. 10 seconds to dry. The scrubby of both the extra fine and the medium, and wow, yeah, I can feel how rough I was. The scrubby of the extra fine and the medium both show us plenty of color variation. We got a lot more in the extra fine than we did in the medium. Smear test says you could likely recover it. So Namasanine paper. Man, this stuff is good. Other than the scrubby, where I'm putting it on stupid thick, and we see where it's coming through, it's following the pen line, which makes me feel I was just scratching at the paper that day. We have no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 offers no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, and beautiful shading all over this writing. All over with the 1.1. Extra fine, no feather, spread, halo, sheen, tons of beautiful shading. It just looks really nice. A gray ink that not a lot of people go for. This is one we should look at because it has some really nice qualities about it. And gray, not being a very common color to use, can help your writing when you have sort of group documents you're writing on, sign-in sheets, that sort of thing. It stands out a little bit. 8 seconds to dry. Medium, same tone as the extra fine. No feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen.
Beautiful shading all over this writing. 12 seconds to dry. The scrubby of the extra fine and the medium show us plenty of color variation, and we got plenty of color variation. And the smear test says you could likely recover it. So I tested this on what is supposedly a cheap paper, because it's a government memoranda pad. It's a toothy paper. It has no bleeding, no ghosting. Now this is a medium up top. It has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, and it does give us some color variation. It is giving us some shading. The T is darker than the rest of Private. The FL is darker than the rest of, than the Anal. Okay, so we do get some color variation in the medium up top. The extra fine has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. A little bit of shading does show up with this ink. Z is definitely darker than the rest of Lazy. The right side of the D for dog is dark and then it gets light again. But this tone overall, to me, is too light to really use. I would not use this ink on this paper because the tone is so light. It looks like I'm losing what I wrote. It looks like it's fading away. It took 7 seconds to dry. The scrubby shows us a lot more color variation than we got in the writing. The smear test, you could likely recover it, but it's so faint. I don't know that it, would really be helpful to you. And that's all that I have for the writing sample.
Instead of finding inks that look like Diamine's Grey Flannel, I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. I've chosen Diamine's Presidential Blue because there's this kind of blue undertone going on with this gray that I think ties them together. Before I give my opinion on this ink, I would ask, if you've enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. And if it's your first time here, I would invite you to subscribe. Now, what do I think of Private Reserve's Grey Flannel? It is a fantastic gray ink that stays gray. And when you use it in broader, wetter pens, you get more of that kind of blue undertone coming through, which ties it to its complement ink. It shows in its chromatography. It's beautiful. Grays are not normally just a watered down black, and this is not. There's colors that are mixed in here that really give this more than just some dull gray. It's a beautiful gray ink. Thanks for watching.